Hello, and thank you for watching the Wine-Centric Show, where we tantalize your taste buds and make it all simple to understand and digest this unbelievable world of wine. Today, as always, we have one of the most magnanimous personalities in this wonderful industry of wine. I don't know how this man ever gets any sleep. He is the Mac Man. He is the host of Bon Appetit's World of Wine and Through the Grapevine. He is none other than Mr. Andre Houston Mack. Welcome.
Yay. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Man, I am good. I am feeling spry today. Yeah, I'm feeling energized, man. I mean, I feel like in comparison to you, I feel like I have 100 things that I still need to do this morning. I don't know how you do it
totally.
all. I'm just going to list off your accomplishments or like what you're doing, what your projects are. And I think it would be overwhelming to most people just thinking about this. Okay. So you have 4 restaurants in Brooklyn with your Sons Hospitality. You make whiskey called Rye & Sons. As I mentioned, you're hosting Bon Appetit's World of Wine. You have your own show, Through the Grapevine, the most watched wine show on YouTube. You make Maison Noir wines, and you've written a book. I'm probably leaving something else out. Is that it? Did I get all of the things?
Yeah, that kind of sums it up. I'm writing another book, so I just signed a book deal about a year ago. That should be actually I owe my editor something right now. So once I get done with this podcast, that's what I'll be working on. But yeah, so new book called Thirst Trap: How to Love Wine Without Monogamy. So that should be coming out 2026. Yeah, no, man, I think we all have the same 24 hours, and it's just, you know how to keep yourself busy, and what kind of work you want to put on your plate. And so I think for me, I think early on what I realized, but it took me a long time, was about delegating, right? You can have it all. Having it all doesn't mean that you have to manage it all, right? And that's that you have to do it all. You just have to manage it. So when I had a team, when I first started building a team, that was that was one of the first steps for me. Now I think my assistant has been working with me for 8 years now, and he's getting an assistant now, right? So you know what I mean? So I think for me, it was just having people on the team, and that's it. And then also just like, I think, most people, they don't ask the right question. I remember when someone says like, hey, how do you, and then they stopped, and then they said, how does your wife let you do all of this? Right. That's the biggest thing. And I'd have to say, I wouldn't necessarily be able to, I wouldn't have a family if I didn't have a spouse or someone who understood how I worked and was
on top of that,
who was independent. Right.
Yeah. I didn't even mention on top of that, you are a dutiful husband and a father of 4 on top of all the other accomplishments.
Yeah, we have 4 boys, and and it's just, it's just great. They're all homeschooled. So like, it's just like this, just I'm living proof and like showing them that our life is like, like you can build the life that you want, and, you can move at your own pace. And for me, the homeschool thing was a little weird. I wasn't sold on it at the beginning. My wife was really gung ho. And I think for me, it really came down to, wanting my children to pursue their passions at an earlier age. And that was the big thing for me, where it's like, hey, if you're into swimming, then we just, you don't swim on Friday when you get your work done. We get you a tutor and you swim every single day, right? It's like, pour your heart into these things and see if you like it or not. And maybe it goes somewhere, or maybe it doesn't. But that, so I could never, I'm not good at taking my kids to sports, like watching them play sports, because I'm overbearing, because I used to be an athlete, something. So it's like one of those things where sometimes I have to turn it down, but my thing is like, I really want them to explore their passions at an earlier age. And, I feel like I'm living proof. I'm not here all the time, but I feel like I get to spend, if not more, or just as much as most fathers do with their kids.
Yeah.
So
I think that's so important, and so important perspective to see yourself like that and know that you're overbearing. So you have that perspective and you step back. I didn't know that you were, I don't remember reading or in my research that you were an athlete growing up. What was your...
No, I played basketball, man. I played pretty hard. Like, played with Shaq. I played with Vernon Maxwell. I mean, I played that whole thing of like, I knew what hard work was, but I didn't, right? Like, it's like hard work. Well, like what do you say? Talent will fail you if hard work. And so I worked really hard, but I got to a point and realized like, oh no, there's a few more steps to working hard. And
Yeah.
so to me, it was like, that's what I was good at. And then when those opportunities started to fade, it was just I just went through life saying, oh, I just want to figure out what I'm good at next. And once I figure that out, I'm never letting go. Right. You know what I mean? And that was it, so it's like wine was that next thing. And once I gravitated to wine, it was just like lights out. Like
But you're good
I
at
I knew how to work hard, but I didn't. I knew how to work hard, and I worked hard and failed because I didn't work long enough. And that is kind of the motivating factor. And for like, once I got into wine.
So you saying you worked hard, but you didn't work long enough?
Correct. Yeah. Just meaning that I think that like, like you can be out there, I mean, dude, like, I mean, I remember all of it. It's like, I didn't get picked for varsity when I was a freshman, like the first time around or something like that, one of the games. And, I went home crying, and I realized that they said you couldn't shoot. I couldn't shoot free throws. I could dribble. I was athletic. And then
So you were like a Gary Payton?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, but, still not as skilled,
Yeah.
and this is in high school, even in like 8th grade. But then the next year it was just like, oh, okay. Like, I'm like shooting free throws in the rain. Right. You know what I mean? It was just like one of those things. And I came back and, I hold some school records for 3-pointers, but I shot free throws, right? Like I became better. But I think it was one of those things is like, oh yeah, you work hard, but like, it's not, the work is never done. Like I think I felt like I got to a point. I was like, oh, I'm good enough. That wasn't it. Like you have to keep pushing. And that was with wine. Like wine, I got into wine really quickly. It was just like,
Let's go
18
there.
months later, 18 months, I'm like the, French Laundry.
Yeah. A meteoric rise, I would say.
Yeah.
I want to take that opportunity. Obviously, I think a lot of people that watch the show are also into sports, but just in case you didn't, and I feel like everybody knows this, but that's just like in wine. So I want to pause and just like relay that story, because beyond like Malcolm Gladwell's rule of 10,000 hours to practice everything to become a master of it is the story of Michael Jordan not making his varsity team as a sophomore, not even a freshman. And then him realizing what it took, putting in the work to it, and then obviously becoming who he became, which his work ethic, I would say, is probably second to none. Well, maybe second to yours, but we'll
Kobe,
see that.
Kobe, I'm Kobe over here.
You're Team Kobe over MJ?
No, not over MJ, but like, this is what I say. It was the best, right? There was no father to his style.
Yes.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, old dirty bastard. Like, he did his thing. Like, he played in the league where nobody else played like him, which made him so exciting. Kobe was the best in the Michael Jordan era, meaning where everybody played like Michael Jordan. Right?
Yes,
everybody was athletic. They
but that's
played
like
the
saying
same.
he was the best of the imitators.
Correct. Well, I mean, I think he would say the same thing, right? That like he did imitate Michael Jordan and wanted to be better. And I felt like in an era where everybody played like Michael Jordan, Kobe was the best.
I would agree with that. That's a good perspective.
Yeah, and they talk about his legendary work ethic, like, 4 a.m, like he's not at the club. He's in the hotel or at, working out or at the gym. And so that was it. For me, I was just like, you don't have control over a lot of things, but I do have control over how hard I can work. And that was always the thing. It's like, I'm not going to let anybody outwork me.
I could talk hoops with you all day, but
gotcha.
We are a wine-centric show. We'll save that We'll save that for the hoop-centric podcast. Before you got into wine, though, I think the story goes that you were in finance. You were maybe doing well. Maybe that's how you helped fund some of your studies and all of that. But is it true you were basically like on your couch watching Frasier?
That is true. So I got into finance. I think there was this movie called Barbarians at the Gate. I think I watched that movie one too many times and decided that I wanted to get into finance. So I took my series 7 and 63, became a licensed stockbroker, but the place that I worked at, they didn't actually have a brokerage firm. So Citicorp Investment Services, I mean, it was just really weird. We just gave stock quotes over the phone. Pardon me. And it wasn't fulfilling in a way. And I was like, so I took severance and I opted to leave. And then I just hung out on my sofa. I had more time than money. Right. And I just kind of sat there. I think I was watching like maybe Judge Judy or some crappy show before. And then they would play back to back to back episodes of Frasier, and I wasn't a fan of the show. You
Right.
know what I mean? I just wasn't a fan of their humor. I just hadn't probably even given it a chance, right? So it was like one of those things where I'm like, oh man, I'm like kind of dozing off, and this show would come on, and it was just the way that they talked about alcohol and wine really kind of piqued my interest, and that show gave me the courage to walk into a wine shop for the first time in my life. It was just like, oh wow, like, okay, this is kind of cool, and I was just doing it just to, maybe I was sad. I don't know, maybe I was depressed, but I was just like, it's like, oh, this seems like something new. And that show kind of armed me with a, comedic antidote. Like I always felt like, I think I always say, something like, the greatest foil to pretension is humor. Right. And so that show, I felt like if I could make fun of myself for not knowing, then no one else could make fun of me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, but that was it. I walked into a store for the first time, and that what got me interested in wine. And that was just drinking wine casually. And then, the money runs out, and then now I have to go back to work. And I worked in restaurants the whole time during college. So I went back to working at Red Lobster, which is really funny because like that same work ethic, dude, I made six figures working at Red Lobster as a waiter.
That's incredible.
In San Antonio, where I think, and I worked 6 days a week, right? So that was fine, but like that was it. I took all the tables, so it was an interesting thing. And then
I want to know what
still
your average tip percentage was at Red Lobster.
I don't know. We had to do everything.
I'm sure
we actually had to bus our own tables. We had to wipe down our own tables. I think for me, like I was like, oh, I get to keep the lion's share of the money, but we had to do more work. But I had heard of this place called the Palm. I won't go into too much detail about that, but like the Palm restaurant, they were opening a restaurant in San Antonio, and I had been to the one in Houston. And I just remember, the people I was with and the kind of money that they spent. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go check this place out. So I ended up getting a job there, and that's where I learned about wine. That's like where I caught the wine bug, where it was just like at the Palm restaurant, I think like third night of training. So there was 2 nights from like 5:30 to like 7:30 where we tasted probably about 80% of the wines on the wine list. And, it wasn't a big list. I think maybe like 60 wines or something like that.
Well, what great training. Like nobody does that. Very few restaurants, managers, management allows you to taste that much percentage of the wine list.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, I didn't know it at the time. That was just what I knew. Right. You know what I mean? Like, or what I didn't know. So it was like, oh, wow. So we sit down, there's 3 glasses of white wine in front of us. And I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? And then you're like, this one's Riesling, this one's Sauvignon Blanc, and this is Chardonnay. And it blew my mind. It just rocked me. And I was like, what? And like, you know what I mean? Because like the closest I ever got to tasting wine side by side is when I had a little bit of wine left in the glass and somebody was pouring a new bottle of wine, right? So you had to like throw it down the hatch. And so that's kind of how it started. I was like, wow, like you knew they were different, but they were like vastly different. And I was like, wow. And then it was a Sauvignon Blanc that had me like messed up, right? Because it was like, it like made me sneeze, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, so it had like this pepper, white pepper, grapefruit. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And that was it. That was like, I want to learn more about this. And I worked in a restaurant. They didn't have a sommelier, right? So you just, everybody knew I was into wine, and so they would just say, hey, can you go talk to my table about wine? I'll watch your table. And that was the kind of confidence that my peers had in me, where it was like, wow. And I have to tell you, like, I got in trouble because I opened a bottle of wine, the cork was saturated, and it ran down my hand, and actually a drop got on a guest. Like this first table to ever come into the restaurant for like friends and family. And they made me come in for 2 weeks and open bottles of wine. And so they didn't, and so, I'm like, just like absorbing, pouring myself into like learning about wine, that the next time, like 5 weeks later, when the trainers come back again, I corrected something on the test, on the wine test. And everybody was like, all my peers were like, no, I think we believe him. Not you.
Like,
so,
it was
question
was
thing.
wrong on the test, or they gave you the wrong answer, right. And you're like, actually,
no, yeah. So I was like, no, it actually encompasses both of these, blah, 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 blah. And the person, it was at that moment that the person was just giving the test didn't really know anything about wine.
Got it.
And so, but yeah, so it was one of those things where it's it's those small little moments that say, keep moving. And that was it. I just, I think for
people listening right now,
I spent every waking moment learning about wine. Like every single second, it was all about wine.
I think just for people listening, like who are trying to kind of learn more, just understand more, the tips you gave, I mean, I think if nobody learns anything else but bringing humor into wine as a way to like relax yourself and make everything else just kind of feel more normal or normalize
Right.
it, like that's the biggest takeaway. And then the contrasting tasting, right? It's so
Yep.
important. Like, for people, a lot of novices or non-wine professionals, people coming in, just getting into wine, they'll drink one wine at a time. And that's great.
Right.
But when you open 2-3 bottles, even
Right.
of similar wine grapes, or do comparison tasting, that will give you so much in a vacuum to get to educate your palate and understand why things taste differently.
Oh yeah, no, I preach to everybody. I'm like, listen, get a couple of friends together. You're having a dinner party. Say, hey, we're going to do Chianti under $15. These are the stipulations, and everybody bring one.
Yep.
And then you all open them up and be able to taste them. At least be able to taste them side by side, even if it's the same wine from the same grape, but the producers are different, maybe different years. But like that's the key. And I think like what I tell people is taste, taste, taste. For me, I've always, when I first got into it, I was like, I'm not a gifted taster because I'd never smelled anything when I, first got into it. I'm like, wow, this is burning my nose hairs, right? Like this is a lot of alcohol versus, and then once you start to taste more and start to understand your palate, like it is a learned skill, right? You know what I mean? Like I was like, shit, I'm just going to be book smart, right? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know about this tasting part. But once I started to put together the wine list at a restaurant called Bohannon's in San Antonio, you taste, I think I tasted over 1,500 wines. And that's when you really start to like understand you have to taste a lot, which means if you're not in the business, it means, there's an outlay of cash. There's some capital that you have to put out there to accumulate these wines, or maybe you're in a wine group or something like that. I think that was the biggest hurdle for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, is just having access to that much wine without spending a lot of money.
Yeah. I want to take it back for a second. And both your parents were in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Did that color your work ethic, your grind? Like, did you have to make your bed every morning?
Oh, yeah.
Did they bounce a quarter on it?
Totally. Well, not necessarily bounce a quarter on it, but there was definitely, this idea of there were expectations, right? So like, yeah, you made your bed in the morning. I had to polish my own shoes. I polished my shoes, right? Penny loafers. I polished them, brother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I bet you could see your reflection in those, right?
Yeah. So there was that kind of structure, that kind of thing. But also, like, I feel like my parents were they really let me immerse myself into things, right? Like I could pour myself, like, dude, like, I mean, I was a weird kid. I think in 3rd grade, I had a subscription to like Time magazine and then Soldier of Fortune. You know what I'm saying? Like I was weird. I was like really into like, military weaponry, Jane's, that Jane's like puts out different like books on military ships and equipment, and I could name guns and equipment on site, like really kind of could pour myself into things. I had chores and those kind of stuff, but like, it was really one of those things. I played sports, but like in those times, I really could pour myself into things. And I think the biggest part of the military thing for me was we moved every 2 years. Every 2 to 3 years we moved. So I was always a new kid. And so learning how to assimilate, learning how to fit in, that was key, being able to make friends. And some days it's hard. I'd come home and like, we've been there for 2 months. And I was like, when are we moving again? And she goes, what happened at school? You know what I mean? But that was it, right? Like for me, I could fit in easy. I was easy to get along with. And I think really what that was is that you just listened, right? I just listened to my friends, right? Like I was an attentive listener. And so I made friends pretty easily, played sports. And so I was pretty popular like in that kind of thing. But like moving every 2 years and having to fit in, I feel like was really helpful for me, right? Especially waiting tables, to walk up to a table of strangers like I've known them, right? And to be able to do that. I think that was it. And also like my mom, like, it's like I believe my mom when she's like, you can do anything. You know what I mean? Like I really felt that way.
Yeah. Yep. I just listening to your story, I think that obviously is such an important reason that you're so affable and able to get in all these different industries, making whiskey, doing your design stuff, all of these things that you do now. Of course, moving it further, why you rose so fast in the wine business from where we left the story to bring it back there, tannins. And this is where I want to ask, like, call it the tough questions, but obviously you are a Black man, and there's not a lot of you in the wine world in general. And do you think that factored in to you coming up because you were different? Did it make it easier? Did it make it harder? And how does that translate to who you are now?
I mean, translate to who I am now. I'm still me.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a hard question. It's actually an easy question, right? It's like, this is me being Black and being in the wine business is no different than me being Black and living in this country. Right. So, there's different ways, you know what I mean? So there's different ways.
Even more of like Black people are already a minority in this country. And, you have all sorts of preconceived notions of who you are, how you relate to society.
Correct.
It's even less. I think it's just like there's more of a dearth of it, so there's more even of a spotlight in the wine business.
Or I wouldn't say, spotlight. I feel like if I wasn't good, then you just wouldn't be good. I was just a Black guy that sucked. Right. You know what I mean? So
totally.
You know what I mean? So for me, how I look at it is I could look at it different ways. Like I could stand out, or I could, either way I can't hide. Right. So I better be good. Right.
Yeah.
And I think for me, a lot of it was timing in at the right place. Has it been helpful? Yeah. I'd have to think so. Right. Like I'd have to think that it has. Has it been detrimental? I'd have to think so. But to be honest with you, I don't waste any time doing that. Right. I get to choose how I feel about any of it and how people treat me. And so for me, I feel like I don't count the negatives. Right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm in the store. Like, Bob told you that I was coming to see you. We're doing a work with. Right. I walk into the store, they say, "Hi, Bob." And then they look to the side and they say, "Can I help you, sir?" I said, "Well, I'm with Bob." Right. Then, they follow me around the store. Sometimes I was like, I could buy this store if I wanted to. Yeah. I choose not to think that the reason why I didn't get something was because of the color of my skin.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? I don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? I don't want to play.
I have to imagine you could probably give 100 examples of in any stage of your career of you walking up to a table and you may like, was there any wine you were interested in tonight? And they're probably, who knows
we're
what
waiting
the
for
reaction.
The sommelier. Yeah. They're like, we're waiting for the sommelier. And I would spin around and say, "Ta-da, I'm here." Right. But like, for me, it's just like, okay, you just weren't used to seeing somebody like me in this role. Okay, great.
Right.
Like, and for me, I think that's how I lead, right? It's like just showing up, doing a great job, right? Being there, being present and being in the moment so now people are used to it. Right. I mean, to me, when I walked up to the table and you didn't think I was a sommelier, I got you. Right. Like I got you already. Right. It's like I got you where I want you.
Yeah.
And, and it's so funny because it used to be that way where I was the last person anybody thought knew anything about wine when I walked into a room. Not so much now, like people are like on the plane, like asking me to take photographs. Right. So, so it's a little different now where, before where I could hide in plain sight. But, I like to think that 18 months from Fraser, I'm immersed in wine, like heavy into it, doing competitions, stuff like that. And just like putting yourself out there. Like that was it. Like I read, it was called Wineless Confidential. It was like an article in Wine Enthusiast. And there were 3 sommeliers in there. There was Jason Smith, who was running Charlie Trotter's, Virginia Phillips, who was running, I think the place in Palm Beach. And then you had Paul Roberts, who was working at Cafe Annie in Houston. So he was the only master sommelier in the whole state of Texas. And I picked up the phone after reading that article at work. So I didn't even have a cell phone. I was using the work phone, and I dialed the restaurant. I dialed Charlie Trotter's and asked to speak to Jason and said, "Hey, I'd love to come. I know Charlie has this thing where chefs come and they do this thing called a stage. Like, do wine people do that? Can I come do that?" And he's like, "Sure." So I was all confident. I picked up the phone. I called Virginia Phillips. I got her. She didn't have a voicemail or something like that. So I didn't talk to her. And then I called Paul Roberts. couldn't get him. And then somebody gave me his, oh yeah, I left a message for him. And then we just played phone tag. And then finally, when I said what I wanted, he never called me back. And then there was a friend of a friend who knew him. And like, I was going to be in Houston, and like the 9 p.m. before the night I was going to Houston, he's like, look, show up at the back door at Cafe Annie tomorrow. And I did. You know what I mean? So like that whole thing of like, okay, no, like the harder you work, the luckier you become. But like, you got to put yourself out there for those things. And I showed up to the back door, Cafe Annie, and to be honest, I didn't want to go in. My girlfriend was in the car. She was going shopping at the Galleria. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to go shopping at the Galleria. And she's like, dude, you're already here. You might as well go in. And I went in, and it changed my life.
Man, you're dropping so many golden nuggets for people listening to this, and maybe like you're established in your career, you need to get to the next level. But two things that I just want to reiterate: the way that you chose to take those moments, whether it being just people's precondition, talking about going back to the moment of going up to a table, being a Black sommelier, and them just never seeing it before. You could have chosen to be like, oh, these people are racist, screw them. But you're just like, kind of, you said it, how you lead. You led with curiosity. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue right now, but you led with curiosity. And instead of changing that into a negative moment, you took it into a positive moment and be like, yeah, I understand. They're not used to seeing it. And so now it's different. And then the other thing you said about, and it's just such a simple thing that nobody does these days, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call somebody. Like, they're not texting you back. They're not emailing you back. Pick up the phone, man. Call somebody.
Correct.
I think it's and have the courage of your convictions to be like, I deserve this. I want this. I'm going to work hard for you. So I'll show up at the back door. And even though I'm scared, I'll walk in and I'll do the job.
I don't think I've ever felt deserving. Like, you know what I mean? I think for me, it's more like, but go. Like, we live in an era now, like where, if like for a job interview, they have to get paid, like to come in and like do a look-see. And, so it's just a different era. I'm not saying one is bad than the other, but for me, what I realized is that I had more time than I had money. And so if I wanted to learn something, I'm going to go help you count inventory. I'm going to show up at the back door and see what I can learn. I think now we're in this mentality, and I totally get what you're saying, because it's like this thing of like, you have to hype yourself up, and sometimes deserving can turn into entitlement. And so I know you're not talking about entitlement, but like, that was it. It's like, oh, then when it becomes entitlement, like, that's to me where I see that it's wrong. It's like, no, it's what you get out of the job. It's not, we live in this weird world where people feel like, oh, well, they're just using me, or I'm not getting paid my worth. And it's like, well, one, you couldn't do this job on your own, right? You know what I mean? Like, you had to learn somewhere. What are you getting out of the job personally? What are you coming in early for, wanting to learn, to move on? Like, I was telling somebody who worked for me, I said, if I told you that, go work somewhere for 18 months, and after you go work at those places for 18 months, I'll back you and open your own restaurant. Do you think that you would learn everything possible that you could? Yeah, but what's the difference? So why does somebody have to tell you that they're going to back you in order for you to turn on like your senses and understand what's happening here?
Yeah.
So many other jobs I got paid $19,000 as a sommelier at the French Laundry.
That's ridiculous, man.
Right? But you ready? But like, I would have paid them.
Right.
If I had a place to live, I would have worked there for free, because I understood the moment. Understood what it meant, understood that it would open doors for me. But like, we live in this world where it's this different. It's about my worth. It's like, in order to know your worth, you have to prove your worth. And that's, that's what I really want, anybody in any field across anything to understand. It's like, and then we throw around this term imposter syndrome, which somebody would never admit to when I was growing up, which is fine. Like, I understand that.
Yeah.
But you have imposter syndrome because you don't know your worth. You haven't proven it to yourself, let alone to your employer. And so those moments, I just feel like that. And back to the other part. Yeah, those people could have been racist when I walked to the table. But you ready? It's none of my business.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It's none of my business, right? For me, like I said, I got to choose how I felt about it. And yeah, I could be mad about it. And a lot of times I just laughed about it.
Yeah.
You walk up to the table, you try to, I had some humor in it. I spun around and said, hey, me, or I just stood there. And then, the wife is elbowing the husband. He's like, asshole, that's him, But but when you're locked in on the goal, those are some of the things that you have to overcome. I'm sure that not just people of color that get it, I'm sure women get it. And it's like, it's always to me, what we say in my family, size on the prize, right?
Eyes on
It's
the
like,
prize.
understand where you're going.
Yeah.
Right. And it may not make sense on the outside. I left a job like per se, which nobody leaves.
Yep.
To try to do something else. The money ran out and, now I'm bartending at some bar, and like, is it embarrassing? Kind of, sort of, but like, I know where I'm going. And I think those are always like good things. It's like, you have to understand and have some sort of vision. You don't have to have a plan. It's like, I wanted to do this thing to get here. It wasn't a straight line, brother.
Yeah.
I was sleeping in zip cars and all kinds of crap. Right. But, and you just have to see it through. And I think a lot of my experience is that, like, it's so funny because when you're like, I was like, I made $19K there. You're like, that's ridiculous. Well, I mean,
just
not,
thinking about
not then.
how you even lived in Napa Valley at that time, making
Correct.
$19K, but you probably never left work also.
No, totally. I was in this little bungalow that was right next to Behringer, and it was $900. It was $900 a month, and it was one room. So it was one room. Then they had like the bathroom just where the toilet was, and like the shower was like off the kitchen, and it was like kind of like a special needs shower, like where they opens up and has the bar rails, so you would get in. It looked weird, like kind of 70s cocoon, but that was it. And and it was exhilarating time. Like, I sold everything I had just to move there. I mean, my mom bought it. I was selling all this stuff. My mom, she's like, baby, I don't know what you're talking about. You're going to you're going to Sommelier. Like, what's happening here? And she's like, she didn't even know. Nobody in my family even knew what a sommelier was.
Sure.
She's like, so baby, you get paid to drink wine and serve wine? I know you work in restaurants. You know what I mean? Like, and she's like, you're selling everything that you have. She's like, this seems like a really big deal to you. And so I sold everything because I needed to buy some suits, and she bought everything and then bought me suits. And then, I had like 5 suits, and I took off to Napa in the car.
How did you even get that job?
Oh yeah. So here we go. Cafe Annie. I showed up at the back door.
Yeah.
Paul Roberts is the only master sommelier in the state of Texas. This is a Thursday. I show up on a Thursday. I'd been calling him all during the week, the previous week, and phone tag, and then he never called me back. And then there was a guy, Leon Sakota, I think at the time worked for Block Distributing. And he's like, hey, I know Paul. He goes, I just talked to Paul. I told him about you. Yeah, he said, just show up at the back door tomorrow. So this is Wednesday night. I'm at work. Leon calls me, says, show up at the back door. I show up at the back door. So the next day, I show up at the back door. So now I'm at the back door. I come in, and Paul's on the phone. I had never met Paul before. So he's like just whipping back and forth, and he's like on his cell phone. And he's like, hey, man, come on in, blah, blah, blah. He's like, so we went upstairs, and they had like this boardroom, which I guess was maybe a private dining room, but it had a big, long-ass table. And when I went up there, there were like all of these wine lists wrapped in saran wrap, like the whole table. It was like a 12-foot table. And so he's like, hey, he goes, so he brings me a wine. He goes, you can hang out here. He brings me a wine list, and he says, this is what we're going to be working with tonight, which was the Cafe Annie wine list. So he goes, make yourself familiar. So I'm flipping through it, blah, 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 blah. Then he comes back in, and he's like, oh, man, sorry about this. He goes, I'm judging a wine list competition. So think about this. This is before like the real internet, right? So he has all the physical ones there. And he says, so he's off the phone. He says, sorry about that. And he says, hey, let's grab a coffee. And then you tell me about yourself. But before so we're walking down the stairs of Cafe Annie to go into the dining room part. And he says, oh yeah. He goes, on Monday, I accepted the job to be the beverage director for all of Thomas Keller's properties.
Hi, folks. I hope you have enjoyed part 1 of the Andre Mack episode. Part 2 will air on New Year's Day, Jan 1, 2025. Please follow us at Wine Centric Show on YouTube and Instagram for updates and sneak peeks. I wish you all happy and healthy holiday and a happy new year. Cheers to drinking deliciously in 2025.